The hospital board called her a liability. They stripped her of her badge and gave her 15 minutes to disappear. But as the elevator doors closed on her career, the sky above the city turned black with rotors. These weren't rescue choppers, they were hunters, and they weren't looking for a doctor, they were looking for a ghost. The fluorescent lights of the administrative wing flickered, casting long, sickly shadows across the floor. Elena Vance looked at the clock. 14 minutes left. To anyone else, it was just a plastic circle on a wall. To her, it was the final countdown of a 3-year attempt to be normal. "You're not hearing me, Elena," Director Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, reaching for that false fatherly tone he used before firing someone. "The board doesn't just look at the outcome, we look at the process. You performed a subxiphoid pericardial window in a hallway, Elena, without a surgical consult, without a sterile field." "The patient was 3 minutes from a flatline," Elena replied, her voice steady, terrifyingly calm. "If I had waited for the surgical consult, you wouldn't be worried about a process. You'd be worried about a lawsuit for a dead mother of 3. Sterling's face flushed a deep, indignant purple. He hated it when she was right, but more than that, he hated the way she looked at him. She didn't look at him like he was the man who held her paycheck in his hands. She looked at him like he was a minor obstacle on a road she had traveled 1,000 times before. "The decision is final," Sterling snapped, sliding a heavy, gold-plated pen into his pocket. "Your belongings have been cleared from the floor. Security will meet you at the locker room to ensure you don't take any hospital property, including your digital access." Elena didn't move, she just stared at him. "You think you're protecting this hospital, Marcus, but all you're doing is removing the only person who knows how to handle the dark. When the real chaos hits, and it always hits, you're going to wish you had someone who knows how to break the rules." "I'll take my chances," Sterling said, looking back down at his paperwork. "Now please get out." Elena turned. Every step she took down the long, carpeted hallway felt like she was shedding a skin. She passed the donor wall, the names of wealthy benefactors etched in glass. She passed the gift shop, smelling of stale popcorn and cheap flowers. And then she descended into the gut of the building, the basement locker rooms. The air was cooler here, smelling of damp concrete and industrial cleaner. She pushed open the heavy steel door. It groaned on its hinges. She stood before her locker, number 402. Inside, she had a backup stethoscope, a photo of her unit in Basra, and a small silver coin, a challenge coin given to her by a man who had promised her that the world would always need people like her. As she pulled the photo off the metal wall, she heard it. It started as a vibration in her teeth. Then it moved to the floorboards. Most people in the city would mistake it for a low-flying commercial jet or perhaps a heavy freight train. But Elena knew better. The frequency was too high, the rhythm too aggressive. It was the synchronized beat of twin-engine turboshaft engines. She walked to the small, high-set window near the ceiling of the basement. It was reinforced with wire mesh, but she could see the sky, or what was left of it. The morning sun was being eclipsed. 2 massive, charcoal-gray shapes were descending from the clouds, their nose cannons pointed directly at the hospital's roof. They weren't displaying any civilian transponders, no red crosses, no rescue markings. On the side of the lead bird, painted in a flat, ghost-gray ink, was a symbol Elena hadn't seen in nearly a decade, a falcon clutching a broken arrow. The vibration grew until the lockers began to rattle against the walls. Somewhere upstairs, she could hear the muffled sounds of people screaming. The civilian world was meeting the hidden world, and the collision was violent. Elena gripped the photograph of her unit. Her heart, which had felt hollow just moments ago, began to beat with a familiar, tactical precision. She wasn't just a fired nurse anymore. She was a target, or a savior, and in her world, there was rarely a difference between the two. The locker room door burst open. It wasn't the security guards Sterling had promised. It was 4 men in black multicam, suppressed rifles held at the low ready, their visors reflecting the dim basement light. The lead operator stepped forward, his boots heavy on the linoleum. He didn't check the other lockers. He didn't look for a threat. He walked straight to Elena. Vance, the soldier said, his voice distorted by his comms mask. The general's clock is at 0. We're moving, now. Elena looked at the man, then at the termination letter still gripped in her hand. She let the paper flutter to the floor, where it landed in a puddle of spilled water. I don't work for the government anymore, Jax, Elena said, recognizing the voice. The government isn't asking, Jax replied, stepping aside to reveal the hallway behind him, already lined with soldiers. The world is on fire, Elena, and you're the only one who knows how to put it out. The basement hallway, usually a sanctuary of humming pipes and quiet laundry carts, had turned into a tactical corridor. Jax and his team moved with a mechanical fluidity that made the hospital's security guards look like toy soldiers. They didn't point their weapons at the staff, but the sheer presence of suppressed rifles and night vision optics was enough to turn the corridor into a vacuum of silence. Elena grabbed her medical bag, the one she'd kept packed with her own supplies, the high-grade gear the hospital wouldn't budget for. She didn't look back at her locker. She didn't look back at the life she had tried to build. The moment she stepped into the center of that tactical diamond, the nurse Vance, who followed HR policies, died. Captain Vance was back. We are taking the service elevator, Jax barked into his comms. Falcon lead, we have the asset, moving to extraction point Alpha, 2 minutes. The elevator doors groaned open. Inside, a terrified delivery person huddled in the corner behind a stack of oxygen tanks. Jax didn't say a word. He simply stepped in, his massive frame taking up half the space. Elena followed, the soldiers flanking her like a human shield. As the elevator began its slow, agonizing crawl toward the roof, the tension was a physical weight. Jax, Elena said, her voice low, who is it? Who's on the table? Jax didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the floor indicator. You know who it is, Elena. There's only one man who could authorize a Black Hawk landing on a civilian hospital in downtown Chicago. Elena's heart skipped. General Silas Thorne. The man was a ghost, a legend in the intelligence community, and the only person who had ever treated Elena like a human being rather than a weapon. He was also the man who had been shot out of the sky in a valley she still saw in her nightmares. The elevator dinged, the doors slid back, and the sound hit them like a physical blow. The rooftop was a hurricane of noise and heat. 2 MH-60M Black Hawks sat on the helipad, their rotors blurring into a solid disk of gray. The downdraft was so powerful it threatened to knock Elena off her feet, but Jax caught her arm, his grip like a vice. But they weren't alone. Standing by the roof access door, looking pale and frantic, was Director Marcus Sterling, flanked by the city's police chief and a huddle of terrified hospital executives. Sterling was screaming, his voice lost in the roar of the engines, waving his arms as if he could stop the machines of war with a gesture. Jax didn't stop. He walked straight toward them. When Sterling tried to step in front of Elena, Jax didn't even slow down. He placed a gloved hand on Sterling's chest and moved him aside like he was clearing a piece of debris. You can't do this, Sterling shrieked as Elena passed. She caught the look in his eyes. It wasn't concern for the hospital. It was pure, unadulterated terror that he had just fired the most important person in the building. He saw the soldiers, he saw the specialized gear, and he realized he had been playing checkers while Elena was part of a game he couldn't even name. Elena stopped for a split second. She looked at Sterling, the man who had told her she was unpredictable and too intense. The patient I saved last night, Elena shouted over the rotors. Send the bill to the Department of Defense. Tell them Captain Vance authorized it. She didn't wait for his reaction. She turned and ran toward the lead helicopter. A crew chief in a flight helmet reached down, grabbing her hand and swinging her into the belly of the beast. The interior was a cramped, red-lit cavern of wires and medical monitors. And there, strapped to a portable surgical litter, was Silas Thorne. He looked gray. His breathing was shallow, a ragged whistle that told Elena everything she needed to know. His chest was covered in a field dressing that was already soaked through with dark, venous blood. Status, Elena yelled at the onboard medic, a young kid whose hands were shaking. Shrapnel in the mediastinum, ma'am. We've got a massive hemothorax. He's been down for 20 minutes. We've used 3 units of whole blood, but it's leaking out as fast as we can pump it in." Elena knelt beside the general. She didn't need a monitor to tell her he was dying. She could feel the coldness radiating from his skin. She looked at the kid. "Stop the transfusion. You're just priming a pump that's broken." "But the protocol says—" "I don't care what the protocol says," Elena roared, her voice cutting through the engine noise. She reached into her bag and pulled out a long, curved needle and a roll of reinforced celastic tubing. "We're not following the book today. We are writing a new one." The helicopter lurched, tilting sharply as it cleared the roof of Mercy Heights. Elena looked out the open bay door one last time. She saw the hospital shrinking below them, saw Sterling standing on the roof like a tiny, insignificant ant. Then the crew chief slammed the door shut, plunging them into the dim, vibrating world of the dying. Elena looked at Thorne. "Don't you dare die on me, sealers," she whispered. "I'm not finished being fired yet." The Black Hawk banked hard, the G-force pinning Elena against the cold metal interior. Outside the bay doors, the sprawling city of Chicago was being replaced by the dark, undulating greens of a forest she didn't recognize. But inside her mind, the scenery was different. She wasn't over the Midwest. She was back in the heat-soaked dust of Basra. She looked down at General Thorne. His face was a map of scars, each one a story she had helped write. Beside her, the young medic was frantically checking the general's vitals, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the blood pressure cuff. "Focus, specialist," Elena said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the roar of the engines like a command from a deity. "If your hands shake, he dies. If you panic, he dies. Do you want to be the reason a legend stops breathing?" The boy swallowed hard, looked at Elena, and took a deep breath. "No, ma'am." "Then hold this," she commanded, handing him a clamp. "Don't move until I tell you." As she worked, the memories began to bleed through. 8 years ago, a valley that felt like a furnace. Falcon 9, the most elite Shadwops unit in the American arsenal, had been walked into an ambush. The official record said they were caught in a crossfire. The truth, the one Elena carried in her marrow, was that they were betrayed by their own intel. Thorne had been the commander then, too. He had stayed behind to cover the retreat of his men. When Elena found him, he was pinned under a burning Humvee, a piece of jagged steel protruding from his chest. The medevac was 20 minutes out. He didn't have 5. The other medics had refused to touch him. "It's too close to the heart, Vance. If we pull it, he bleeds out in seconds. If we leave it, he suffocates. He's gone. Tag him black and move to the next." But Elena hadn't moved. She had looked at Thorne, a man who had 3 kids and a wife waiting in Virginia, and she had seen a life, not a black tag. She had taken a field-grade cautery tool, a bottle of cheap whiskey, and a plastic straw from a ration pack. She had performed a procedure that defied every manual in the Pentagon. She had bypassed the artery using the straw as a temporary shunt, searing the edges of the wound as she went. She saved him, but in doing so, she had exposed the failure of the military's standard medical gear. To protect the contractors and the brass who approved the equipment, they had silenced her. They called her unstable. They said she had performed an unauthorized human experiment. They gave her a choice: a quiet discharge with a sealed record, or a court-martial for reckless endangerment. She chose the silence. She chose Mercy Heights. She chose to be a nobody nurse who followed the rules until last night. "Ma'am, his pulse is thready," the medic yelled, snapping her back to the present. "We are losing the rhythm." Elena looked at the monitor. The EKG was a chaotic mess of jagged lines, ventricular fibrillation. The shrapnel from this new wound, a gift from a dirty bomb in a country the US wasn't officially at war with, had shifted. "He's not dying today," Elena whispered. It was a promise to the man and a defiance to the system that had tried to erase her. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, specialized kit. It wasn't hospital-issued. It was a custom-built set of titanium tools she had spent her life savings on, designed for the Vance protocol. "Jax," she screamed toward the cockpit, "I need you to level this bird. I'm going in, and if we hit a pocket of turbulence, I'm going to slice his aorta wide open." Jax didn't look back. but the helicopter suddenly felt as steady as a mountain. Elena leaned over Thorne, her face inches from his. The smell of copper and jet fuel was overwhelming. She took a scalpel and made a precise 2-inch incision. No anesthesia. Thorne was too far gone for that to matter. "You stayed for your men in Basra, sealers," she muttered as she worked. "Now you stay for me." She inserted her fingers into the wound, feeling for the cold, jagged edge of the metal. There it was. It was vibrating with every heartbeat, a ticking time bomb inside his chest. The young medic watched, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. He was watching a master at work, a woman who had been fired by a man in a mahogany office because she was too intense. Suddenly, the helicopter jolted. A warning light flashed red in the cabin. "We've got company," Jax yelled from the front. "Surface-to-air radar lock, hold on." The Black Hawk dove, a sickening drop that sent Elena's stomach into her throat. But her hands didn't move an inch. They remained locked inside the general's chest, shielding his heart from the metal shard as the world turned upside down. The Black Hawk didn't land. It slammed onto the tarmac of a hidden airfield in the Virginia wilderness. Before the dust had even settled, the bay doors were ripped open. A team of surgical techs in sterile gowns stood waiting, their faces ghostly under the harsh floodlights of the hangar. "Move, move, move," Jax roared, jumping out and grabbing the front of Thorne's litter. Elena was right beside him, her hand still applied to the pressure point in Thorne's chest, her fingers numbing but locked in place. As they wheeled the general into the underground facility, the smell of jet fuel was replaced by the sharp, ozone scent of a high-tech trauma center. This wasn't a hospital, it was a fortress. They burst through the double doors of Operating Room 1. Inside, a man stood waiting, scrubbing in at the sink. He was tall, silver-haired, and radiated an aura of supreme confidence. Dr. Julian Vane, the Department of Defense's top cardiothoracic surgeon. Vane looked up, his eyes narrowing as he saw Elena, messy hair, blood-stained scrubs, and no surgical mask. "Who is this? Get her out of my OR." "She's the one who stabilized him, Doc," Jax said, not slowing down. "I don't care if she's the Pope," Vane snapped. "This is a sterile field, and she looks like she crawled out of a gutter. Nurses belong in the ward, not in my theater. Get her out now." Elena didn't move. She couldn't. If she let go of the pressure point for more than 3 seconds, the general's chest cavity would fill with blood faster than any machine could suction it out. "Dr. Vane," Elena said, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "I am Captain Elena Vance. I wrote the protocol you're about to fail at. If you want me to leave, you'd better have a hand ready to replace mine, because the second I lift my finger, Sealer's Thorne is a memory." Vane froze. The name Vance carried a weight in certain circles that surpassed any medical degree. He looked at her hand, buried deep against the general's sternum. He saw the precision, the lack of tremor. "The Vance protocol is a myth," Vane whispered, stepping closer. "A field expedient hack used by desperate medics." "Then watch a myth save your patient," Elena countered. "Now give me a gown and a mask. We're going in together, or you can explain to the Joint Chiefs why you let the most important man in the military die because of your ego." For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Vane gestured to a nurse. "Gown her, now." The next hour was a blur of steel and light. The surgical team moved like a well-oiled machine, but the tension was thick enough to break a blade. Vane was fast, but he was traditional. He wanted to follow the textbook: resection, bypass, and closure. "The shrapnel has a secondary charge, Doctor," Elena warned, looking at the X-ray on the digital monitor. "It's a specialized insurgent design. If you apply the cautery tool directly to the metal, the heat will trigger a micro-percussion cap. It won't blow the room, but it'll shred his heart from the inside." Vane stopped, his hand hovering with the electric cautery. "That's impossible. It's a metal shard, not a bomb." "I've seen it in Basra," Elena said, her eyes locked on the monitor. "They design them to kill the surgeons who try to save the survivors. You have to use cold steel extraction. No heat, no lasers." "Cold steel on an aortic nick," Vane's voice was incredulous. He'll bleed out before I can tie the first knot. Not if I shunt it, Elena said. She reached for a sterile tube, her mind already 3 steps ahead. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a ghost from a war they tried to forget, using techniques they tried to ban. As she worked, she felt the eyes of the entire surgical team on her. They were watching the woman who had been discarded by Mercy Heights do things they hadn't even seen in textbooks. Suddenly, the heart monitor began to wail, a long, continuous beep that signaled the end. Tachycardia, he's going into a storm, the anesthesiologist yelled. We are losing him, Vane, do something. Vane hesitated. The textbook didn't have an answer for a bomb inside a heart during a cardiac storm. But Elena didn't hesitate. She grabbed a syringe of pure adrenaline and plunged it directly into the heart muscle, then followed it with a maneuver so aggressive the room gasped. Elena, wait, Vane shouted. I'm not waiting, she growled. I'm taking him back. The alarm in the operating room was a flat, piercing scream that signaled the end of a life. General Thorne's heart hadn't just stopped, it was seizing. The monitor showed a chaotic, jagged VFib pattern. Dr. Vane reached for the defibrillator paddles, his face pale under the surgical lights. Charge to 200, Vane shouted. Wait, Elena's voice was a whip crack. She had her hands deep inside the chest cavity, her fingers sensing a vibration that no machine could detect. If you shock him now, the electrical arc will hit that shrapnel. I told you, there's a micropercussion cap. You'll detonate it. He's dead if we don't, Vane countered, his finger hovering over the button. Move your hands, Vance. I'm not moving, Elena stared him down over her mask. Her eyes were cold, filled with the memory of 100 battlefields. Give me the bypass clamp and a 10cc syringe of cold saline. Now. The room held its breath. It was a standoff between the highest-paid surgeon in the country and a nurse who had been fired 4 hours ago. Jax, standing by the door, shifted his weight, his hand resting on his sidearm. He didn't know medicine, but he knew Elena. He knew that when she looked like that, the laws of physics usually took a back seat to her will. Vane hesitated for a split second, then shoved the paddles aside. Give her the tray. Elena worked with a speed that blurred the vision of the assisting nurses. She didn't use the standard tools. She took the cold saline and began to ice the metal shard, lowering its temperature to stabilize the sensitive explosive charge. Simultaneously, she used her left hand to manually compress Thorne's heart, a literal, hand-pumped life support. Thump, thump, thump. Every squeeze was a gamble. Every movement of the jagged metal against the heart wall was a potential tear. The rhythm is stabilizing, the anesthesiologist whispered, his voice full of disbelief. He's coming back. Don't celebrate yet, Elena grunted. The sweat was stinging her eyes, but she didn't blink. I have to get it out. Vane, I need you to hold the suction. If a single drop of blood obscures my view, we're all dead. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. Elena used a pair of non-conductive, ceramic-tipped forceps. She moved in increments of millimeters. The shrapnel was hooked like a barb into the tissue of the aorta. As the metal finally cleared the artery, a spray of dark blood hit Elena's mask. She didn't flinch. She clamped the vessel with the precision of a jeweler. Shrapnel is out, she said, her voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. She dropped the shard into a lead-lined bowl. It didn't make a clink, it made a heavy, dull thud. Vane stepped back, his hands trembling slightly as he lowered his instruments. He looked at the monitor, a steady, beautiful sinus rhythm. Thorne's heart was beating on its own. I've never seen anything like that, Vane admitted, his voice stripped of its previous arrogance. That wasn't surgery, that was something else. It was the Vance protocol, Doctor, Jack said from the shadows. You just saw why the Pentagon spent $10 million trying to pretend she didn't exist. Elena stepped away from the table, her legs suddenly feeling like lead. She stripped off her bloody gloves. The adrenaline that had been sustaining her since the basement of Mercy Heights was beginning to evaporate, leaving a cold, hollow ache in its place. She walked over to the lead bowl and looked at the piece of metal that had almost ended a legend. It was inscribed with a serial number. Elena leaned in, her eyes narrowing. She recognized the manufacturer's mark. It wasn't foreign. It wasn't an insurgent's crude creation. It was a mark she had seen on crates in the hospital's own supply chain. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning ran down her spine. The general hadn't been hit by an enemy. He had been hit by a weapon manufactured by Apex Global, the same parent company that owned Mercy Heights Hospital. "Jax," Elena whispered, waving him over. Jax looked at the bowl, then at Elena. He saw the realization in her eyes. "What is it?" "This isn't just a rescue mission, Jax," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "It's a cover-up. The person who fired me this morning and the person who tried to kill the general, they're working for the same man." The sound of the door locking from the outside echoed through the sterile room. The red, in use, light above the OR door stayed on, but the windows to the observation gallery suddenly went dark. They weren't in a hospital anymore. They were in a trap. The silence that followed the locking of the OR doors was more deafening than the roar of the Black Hawks. Elena stood over the unconscious general, the lead-lined bowl in her hand feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She looked at the serial number again. "Apex Global, Jax," she whispered, her voice tight. "The hospital isn't just a place of healing. It's a testing ground. This shrapnel, it wasn't designed by an insurgent in a cave. It was engineered in a lab. Probably one funded by the same people who signed Sterling's paychecks." Jax stepped toward the observation window. He pressed his gloved hand against the glass. It didn't hum with the vibration of the facility. It was dead. "The comms are dark, Elena. My team outside isn't responding. We're boxed in." Dr. Vane, the silver-haired surgeon, backed away from the operating table, his hands raised in a gesture of frantic innocence. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I was just told the general was hit in a training accident. I didn't know about the munitions." "A training accident with illegal microexplosive shrapnel." Elena stepped toward him, the bloody scalpel still in her hand. "You're either a liar or the most expensive puppet the DoD ever bought, Vane. Which is it?" Before Vane could answer, the overhead intercom crackled to life. It wasn't the voice of a soldier. It was a smooth, corporate tone, the kind of voice that delivers quarterly earnings reports while people lose their pensions. "Captain Vance," the voice echoed, "we truly hoped it wouldn't come to this. We expected you to fail. We expected the general to expire on the table, a tragic victim of unforeseen complications. Your competence, as always, is your greatest liability." Elena looked up at the darkened gallery. "Who are you?" "I am the representative of the interests you've spent your life disrupting," the voice replied. The general was going to testify. He was going to expose the Vance Protocol, not as a miracle, but as a necessity caused by our flawed equipment. He was going to dismantle a billion-dollar defense contract. We couldn't let that happen. Elena felt a cold rage settle into her bones. They had used her. They had brought her here to be the miracle worker so that when Thorne inevitably died, they could blame her reckless methods. She was the perfect scapegoat, a disgraced nurse with a history of insubordination. "You're not leaving this room, Elena," the voice continued, "but we are prepared to offer you a deal. Walk away. Let the general succumb to a post-operative infection. We will give you a new identity, a clinic in the Caymans, and more money than you could earn in 10 lifetimes at Mercy Heights." Elena looked down at Silas Thorne. His chest rose and fell in a steady, fragile rhythm. He had risked everything to tell the truth. He had come looking for her because he knew she was the only one who wouldn't be bought. "Jax," Elena said, not taking her eyes from the gallery, "how many rounds do you have?" Jax checked his sidearm with a metallic click. "Enough for the room, not enough for the building." "Then we make them count," she said. She turned back to the intercom. "I was fired this morning for saving a woman in a hallway. You think a billion-dollar contract is going to make me blink? I don't care about your money. I care about my patient, and my patient is leaving this building." "Then you've chosen a very expensive way to die," the voice said. The lights in the OR suddenly turned red. A hiss of gas began to seep from the ventilation grates. "Nitrous mix," Vane stammered, covering his face. "They're going to put us under." "Not today," Elena growled. She grabbed a bottle of surgical spirits and a roll of gauze. She doused the fabric and handed a piece to Jax. "Cover your mouth, Jax. The glass is reinforced, but the seal at the base is standard silicone. Hit the corner with the butt of your rifle." Jax didn't hesitate. He swung the heavy stock of his weapon into the corner of the observation glass. The sound was like a gunshot. The glass spiderwebbed but held. He hit it again and again. Elena grabbed a portable oxygen tank from the anesthesia cart. "Get ready," she told Jax. "When that glass breaks, the pressure change is going to pull the gas toward the gallery. That's our window." She looked at the unconscious general. She couldn't move him yet. His heart was too stable to risk a sprint. She had to hold the room. She had to turn this operating theater into a bunker. "Vane," she barked, "if you want to live, grab that crash cart and barricade the south door. Jax, give me your backup piece." The fired nurse stood in the center of the red-lit room, a pistol in one hand and a syringe of adrenaline in the other. She had been pushed out of the civilian world and hunted by the military world. Now she was going to show them why you never, ever corner a medic who has nothing left to lose. The reinforced glass didn't just break. It shattered under the combined force of Jax's final kick and the pressure of the venting gas. As the shards rained down like diamond dust, the vacuum effect pulled the white mist of the nitrous mix upward, clearing the air around the operating table. "Go now," Elena screamed, pulling her makeshift mask tighter. She didn't grab a rifle. She grabbed the crash cart. She slammed it into the side of the electronic door panel, the heavy metal frame crunching the circuitry. The door hissed open. Beyond it, the hallway was a strobe-lit nightmare of red emergency lights and the wail of sirens. Jax led the way, his suppressed rifle barking 3 times as 2 private security contractors in Apex Global uniforms rounded the corner. They dropped without a sound. This wasn't a hospital anymore, it was a kill zone. "We can't carry the general through the front door," Jax shouted over his shoulder. "They'll have the perimeter locked down by now." "We're not going to the front door," Elena replied, her eyes scanning the facility map etched into her memory from her briefing. "We're going to the communications array. If we can get a signal out to the Pentagon's main server, the encryption on that shrapnel serial number will trigger an automatic internal affairs investigation. They can kill us, but they can't kill a digital footprint." They moved like a ghost unit. Jax provided the cover, Elena provided the navigation. Every time they hit a locked door, Elena used her knowledge of hospital overrides, secrets she'd learned at Mercy Heights that applied to every medical facility built by the same parent company. They reached the server room on the 4th level. It was a forest of black towers and blinking blue lights, humming with the weight of 1,000 secrets. Elena dove toward the main console. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "I need your biometric bypass, Jax," she said. "The Falcon 9 override. It's the only thing that will pierce the Apex firewall." Jax pressed his thumb to the scanner. "Access granted." "Uploading the surgical footage," Elena muttered, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Uploading the shrapnel analysis, and sending the termination letter from Marcus Sterling." "Why the letter?" Jax asked, glancing at the door as boots hammered down the hallway. "Because," Elena said, a dark smile touching her lips, "I want the world to see that the woman who exposed this was the same woman they said wasn't good enough to work a night shift." The progress bar hit 98%. Thud, the server room door buckled. Someone was using a RAM. 99%. The door burst open. 6 men in tactical gear flooded the room. Jax opened fire, pinned behind a server rack. Elena didn't move, she didn't flinch, she watched the bar. "Upload complete, broadcast global." Elena stood up and raised her hands, but she wasn't surrendering. She was looking at the lead operative, a man she recognized from the Apex boardroom. "You're too late," she said, her voice echoing through the server farm. "The file just hit every major news desk from DC to London. You didn't just fire a nurse today. You fired the whistleblower who just ended your company." The operative's radio crackled. A voice, frantic and panicked, came through. "Abort, abort. The SEC and the military police just breached the outer perimeter. Get out of there." The men in the room looked at each other, then at Elena. They knew the game was over. They turned and ran, disappearing into the service tunnels like rats leaving a sinking ship. Elena slumped against the console, the weight of the last 12 hours finally crushing her. She looked at Jax, who was lowering his weapon. "Is it over?" Jax asked. "No," Elena said, looking at the screen where General Thorne's vitals were being monitored remotely. "Now comes the hard part. Now we have to make sure no one ever has to choose between their job and their soul again." She walked back toward the OR, toward the man she had saved. She had one more thing to do before this shift was officially over. The dust had finally settled over the secret facility, but for Elena Vance, the air still tasted of adrenaline and iron. 2 hours after the data breach, the facility wasn't being run by Apex Global anymore. It was being swarmed by federal marshals and a high-level medical oversight team from the Department of Justice. General Silas Thorne was awake. He was pale, hooked to a battery of monitors, but his eyes were clear. He looked at Elena as she sat by his bedside, still in her tattered, blood-stained scrubs from Mercy Heights. "You did it, Elena," Thorne whispered, his voice a gravelly rasp. "You didn't just save me, you saved the truth." "I just did my job, Silas," Elena replied quietly. "Like I did in Basra, like I did yesterday morning." "No," Thorne said, reaching out a trembling hand to touch her sleeve. "Yesterday, you were a nurse they thought they could throw away. Today, you're the woman who's going to rebuild the system." The scene shifts 1 week later. The glass doors of Mercy Heights Hospital slid open. The atmosphere inside was frantic. News crews were camped out on the sidewalk, and the board of directors was in an emergency session. Marcus Sterling stood in the lobby, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 7 days. His stock options were worthless, his reputation was in the dirt, and a federal subpoena was sitting on his mahogany desk. He looked up as a black SUV pulled into the ambulance bay. Elena Vance stepped out. She wasn't wearing scrubs anymore. She was wearing a crisp, dark suit, and on her lapel was a small silver pin, a falcon clutching an arrow. Sterling scurried toward her, his face a mask of desperate flattery. "Elena, we were just talking about you. The board has voted. We want to rename the East Wing after you. We've cleared your record. There's a massive signing bonus waiting." Elena stopped. She didn't look at his outstretched hand. She looked through him as if he were made of glass. "I'm not here for a job, Marcus," Elena said, her voice echoing off the marble floors. "And I'm not here for an apology. I'm here because the Department of Defense just purchased the controlling interest of this hospital's parent company. As of 10 minutes ago, Mercy Heights is now the primary civilian military training site for the Vance Institute of Emergency Medicine." Sterling's jaw dropped. "What?" "You're fired, Marcus," Elena said, the words landing with a satisfying finality. "Security will escort you out in 15 minutes. Don't worry, I've already cleared your locker." She walked past him, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. She wasn't heading for the executive suites. She was heading for the basement, to the locker rooms where the real work began. She stood before the young nurses and medics who were starting their shifts. They looked at her with wide eyes, some with fear, but most with a flickering hope. "Listen up," Elena commanded. "From now on, we don't work for the board. We don't work for the insurance companies. We work for the person on the table. If the protocol says let them die, you break the protocol. If the system says they aren't worth the cost, you prove them wrong. My name is Elena Vance, and I'm going to teach you how to be reckless." Elena Vance was discarded by a system that valued silence over lives. They tried to bury her, but they forgot she was a seed. She proved that your worth isn't decided by a man behind a desk or a termination letter. It's decided by what you do when the world is on fire and everyone else is waiting for permission. If Monica's, if Elena's, story proves that the system doesn't get the final say, if you believe that being too much or too reckless is often just the price of being a hero. Then I want to hear from you. Drop a never quit in the comments right now. Share this story with someone who's been told they aren't enough, someone who's been dismissed by a boss who didn't see their value. Let them know that the world is waiting for the moment they stop following the rules and start following their heart. And if you believe in honoring the people who save lives in the shadows, then hit that subscribe button. We are here to tell the stories of the indispensable, the stories of the people they tried to fire but couldn't live without. This is your command. Stand tall. We'll see you in the next mission.